The only one for me is you.
Something's gone wrong in the happy-go-lucky world of Nintendo.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Player One Start. Today we're going to talk about an issue that's near and dear to my heart as a retro game collector. It's an issue that plagues many retro game collectors around the world. This issue is actually a flaw that was built into some of our early cartridges when we were growing up. Whether we were aware of it or not, we were being affected every single time we tried to play one of these games. I run into this issue a lot more now that I've collected a lot of retro games, and it's something that plagues me on an almost daily basis, especially when I'm trying to decide which new game I'm going to play. So today we're going to be talking about lack of end labels. When looking through several online forums about retro game collecting, you can see that this is an issue that a lot of people have come across, and there are several different solutions people have for it, but I'm going to try to come up with my own solution in this video. So as you can see from some of the games in my collection, if I was actually going to put these on the shelf next to my other retro games, I would actually have no clue which game was which, and I'd have to go through every single time and look at the front of the end label to be able to see what I'm playing. So here's Great Golf, oh the Ninja, and it just takes a lot more time, and it doesn't really look as well when I compare it to everything else that's on my shelf. The Sega Master System cartridge is actually designed really well because it's square on every single end. No matter which way I stack it on my shelf, it's probably going to sit there for a while and not be disturbed too easily. Now, I don't really fault the Sega Master System too much for one reason. The Sega Master System boxes were actually very durable and meant to be kept with the game. So this is actually how they're supposed to be stored. And this one, surprise surprise, has a label on the spine so that if you stack it next to one another, then you'll be able to see which game they are. However, with later consoles such as the Nintendo 64, the boxes were very flimsy, and hence a lot of people threw them away rather than keep them in their boxes. And since the N64 cartridges did not have end labels on them, I kind of fashioned my own. But there was a problem with this method. Eventually these just start peeling off, and there's kind of no permanent method I have of keeping these labels on here. I also didn't like the fact that I was adding a label to the game cartridge because I spent a lot of time removing price labels from the cartridges when I get them from thrift stores or pawn shops. So I came up with the idea to come up with a better system for storing my Nintendo 64 games. The first thing I did was scour eBay for some possible ideas on how to get some replacement cases. However, these turned out to be way too expensive for my taste. However, after doing some searching through other online sources, I was able to find a supplier that makes universal game cases for any game cartridge, including the Nintendo 64. The next step I took was to find a way to get some inserts that I could use to make the game cases look a lot better on the shelf. So all of my box art designs came from one site, and that is the Cover Project. I'll put a link down in the description of this video. After downloading the box art of each of the games that I own, I had to find a way to print them off. I've tried using inkjet printers in the past to create box art, however, over time these things just don't hold up. They almost immediately start becoming very wavy because the paper kind of folds under the moisture of the ink. The colors can end up fading away or running, and it just doesn't look well over time. So I suggest that if you have access to a color laser printer, to go ahead and use this instead. I went ahead and used regular 8.5 by 11 paper. I didn't use anything like heavy cardstock or anything, and it actually ended up turning out very well. Here are some of the prints that I made. Now, I don't have access to any fancy photo editing software, so I just went ahead and used the built-in Windows Picture Viewer to go ahead and scale and print out the images. So right after I download the image, I go to the Windows Picture Viewer, and it gives you some options on what the quality is that you can print them out on. It'll only go as high as your printer can go, so since mine can go up to 600 by 600 dots per inch, that's what I ended up using. You can also adjust the paper size. I decided to stick with 8.5 by 11 as I mentioned earlier. You can change it to the legal size though if you want. I actually printed out one of those and one of the 8.5 by 11 so I can compare the two to see how they look. You will definitely want to do a couple of test prints before you start printing off all the rest of the labels you want to do. If you want more accurate scaling and printing, you will definitely want to use a program like Photoshop to go ahead and print that out. Once I had my labels printed out, it was time to start inserting them into the cases. I decided to go ahead and start with an iconic game. Let's go ahead and do Mario Kart 64 first. The next step is to cut them down to size. One thing that I found worked a little bit better, I have access to a straight paper cutter, but I didn't like using it as much as cutting it out by hand. It was very hard for me to judge how to line up the paper with the cutter, so it ended up making a lot of slanted cuts and I had to waste a lot of paper doing this. I found out I could be much more accurate doing it by hand. However, this did take a lot longer. Using 8.5 by 11 has a certain issue. These cases are actually just perfect to fit an 8.5 by 11 sheet. However, most printers are not capable of printing to the edge of every page. So if I use this regular paper, it's going to leave this blank edge on each side of my case art. I did an experiment where I used a larger size paper to get the box art to go through, and here's the result of that on my Sega 32X game. It looks good, but it took an incredible amount of effort to get the image scaled correctly and printed out correctly, and then it takes a lot to get it cut down to size correctly as well. So since this wasn't a very efficient process, I decided to go ahead and use the 8.5 by 11 paper with those margins on it. But if you're very picky about this, go ahead and use the larger paper size, and you'll just have to scale the image correctly and make sure it prints out right. So I'm not going to record myself doing all of these cases, but I did record myself doing the first 3 so I can see how they can compare when stacked next to each other, and it looks pretty good. Now that I have the boxes ready, it's time to start putting games into the cases. While putting these games on the shelf, I ran into an issue where the cases take up more room than the actual cartridges used to, so I had to readjust my shelves and make them wider so that they could fit all on the same shelf in the same space. So after getting all that done and cutting out the rest of the labels, here's what the final result looks like. And also, since these take up more space, I had to make more room, so I moved all my Atari games off to a different storage location so I can display all my N64 games next to each other. So as you can see, this looks a lot better now when I'm trying to look for a game for my N64. It actually looks a lot better to present as well, so if other people come in and see it, it looks a lot nicer. Now I do like storing my N64 cartridges in the boxes better than I like storing them stacked up on the side with those custom printed end labels for a couple of reasons. Number one, now the game actually has a little bit more built-in protection. Keeping them in this box will probably keep those contacts from getting dusty, and if any of them were to fall off the shelf, the case is probably going to break more so than the cartridge, so it gives them a lot more protection. Now, one thing you're bound to ask about that I made a decision to do about these cases is that why didn't I choose to use a standard format for my cartridge labels? You'll notice that some of them have the N64 label on the side, and some of them have the original box art on the side. Well, aside from making the game collection look uniform, I decided to make the game collection look a little bit more authentic by having different box styles on there. If you look at my PC box collection, no two boxes look the same. They're all different shapes and sizes, and even though the N64 boxes were all the same size, they didn't always share the same box art features. So I think this gives it a little bit better authenticity. I mean, true, these are all copied labels, but I like having this look rather than having the uniform look, because it also helps games stand more apart, which is what my original purpose of this whole project was. I wanted the games to look separate from what they were. Some people may not like the way that I did it, but I decided to do it the way I wanted to because I'm the one who ultimately has to live with it. Alright, well that about wraps it up for this project. I really hope you guys enjoyed it as I enjoyed making this video for you. Again, if you like what you see, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, share with a friend, and I want to thank you so much for watching as always, and stay tuned because I have more content coming.